You're listening to Driving Performance, your go-to podcast for unmatched expertise in the world of buying and selling an automotive dealership. Each episode features discussions with industry leaders and is brought to you by Performance Brokerage Services, North America's premier, family-owned automotive dealership brokerage firm with over 30 years of experience. We're here to ensure you gain the most reliable insights to confidently navigate a transaction and accomplish your unique goals. Whether you're looking to buy or sell, we prioritize building lasting relationships and maximizing the value beyond the transaction level. Here are your hosts, Jamie Farley and Paul Keckney, for another segment of Shifting Gears.
Welcome back to Driving Performance. We are talking about reinsurance today. It's one of those things that almost every dealer has, but not many actually fully understand it. So this episode is about getting to the bottom of that because reinsurance can be a serious game changer. We're talking about building wealth, improving cash flow, planning for succession, and even helping with acquisitions. So today we're diving in. What is reinsurance? How does it work? And how are the smartest dealers using it to their advantage?
Yes, it comes up in conversations I have with dealers all the time. So we figured let's bring an expert in that's dealing with this subject and put him on our show. So Jeff Alpert is a partner and board member for Composition Wealth. Jeff, real happy to have you here today and talk about reinsurance. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. Really excited to talk about something that I think is pretty misunderstood in our space, but extremely important to dealers, even more so now in the current climate, current environment. So looking forward to today and dispelling some of the myths and demystifying some things about reinsurance.
Yes, Jeff, we're so happy to have you on. And you just said it right off the bat. Reinsurance is often called one of the most understood things, but most powerful tools available to dealers. So why don't you first just give us a quick snapshot of what you do, a little bit about your background, and then maybe tackle some of the basics of what exactly reinsurance is in the dealership world.
Absolutely. So I began my career actually on the buy-sell side of the business as a corporate attorney and realized that there was an opportunity to work within this reinsurance space and join the wealth management side of the business. So what we do is we really get to sit in the corner of the room. We manage money in these reinsurance programs for dealers nationwide, for basically every administrator in the country. So we're not an administrator. We're not your dealer developer. We're not the folks that are in the store partnering very closely with those individuals. But we really just get to see these programs operate from sitting in the room in the corner and ultimately want to help dealers build programs that are profitable for themselves, but most importantly, take care of the customers. And that's something that reinsurance offers to the dealers. It's great for the customer, great for the dealer, great for the dealership team as well.
So what are dealers typically missing when it comes to the potential of reinsurance? I know that, by the way, I'm a former dealer. You probably see my sign up there, and I had a reinsurance program. I'm not really sure I totally understood it. And I don't think I'm alone in that scenario.
You're absolutely not alone. We travel the country speaking at 20 groups all over. And the first thing I say is let's all check our egos at the door because this is something that's very misunderstood and it's by design. So this space has really profited from a lack of information, which you're starting to see change now. So the way we look at this, it's all about education. And these programs, just by their nature, are a bit more complex. And dealers are really good at sticking to what they know. That's what makes dealers so great. And this is something that dealers honestly don't necessarily know that well. But if you can educate yourselves, they can become extremely powerful, extremely deep centers of profit for your dealership group that could be used for growth, many other reasons, which I know we'll get into later.
So yeah, I love that point about kind of not understanding it fully. What are dealers typically missing when it comes to the potential of their programs? Like maybe we can get into some specifics here.
Yeah, so I think at its really top level, it's about money going in and money going out. So these programs are all about when the dealers are selling vehicles, selling F&I contracts, that's the money going in. And then on the back end of this, you have the claims, that's the money coming out. So very simple to understand, but like I say, the simplest things in reinsurance are difficult. So between the time those dollars go in and between the time those dollars come out, there's a lot of different things that can happen. And through those different processes, That's where you really have to keep an eye on things and be tight. Because if you think about it, the dealer has multiple businesses. They have new, used, parts service, and then F&I, and potentially body shop. You can roll that into any other piece of that. And reinsurance really impacts every single piece of those business lines. And it takes a lot of work for the dealers to understand how they can maximize that.
So maybe just a follow-up on that with the money in versus money going out. When the money is going in, maybe you can give us kind of a picture of what's happening. How long is that money sitting there? What's kind of like that time frame look like?
Yeah, so the beauty of reinsurance, and this is what makes insurance so great. It's why Warren Buffett has made most of his wealth through insurance, is that the day the vehicle is sold, the dealer is collecting money, the reinsurance premiums. Now, they don't have to pay out those premiums for many years in most cases, because Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer now has a warranty. They now have things for key and for dent and, paint protection, all types of warranties. And most of those claims aren't going to arise for a period of years. So you're the dealer. You've now sold $1,000 worth of products to the customer. You collect the $1,000. Customer has these great warranty and protection products. What you do as the dealer is you get to invest that money for a period of 1, 2, 3, 4 years before the customer ever comes back with a claim. So now when the customer comes back with a claim at year, T plus 3, you've taken that 1,000 and you've actually grown it to 1,100 or 1,200. That's our role as the investment manager. So now we're paying for that key out of investment income, and we're keeping all of that underwriting premium as profit.
So to kind of further that, then you said when the money goes in and then when it comes out, and it's that time in between, is another factor that comes into play, and it must, because I hear dealers talk about this all the time, is the management fees to manage this program. I mean, is that a big component as well that you're looking at?
So that's what makes these programs really challenging to run. As I always say, you show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. So reinsurance administrators, the way that they make their money is through what's called an admin fee. And then there's some other fees that, depending on the administrator, that they charge to run these programs. So to the dealer, typical admin fee could be, let's say, $200. So in that example, you sell $1,000 worth of products. Your finance office now remits $1,000 to the reinsurance company. You're only going to see 800 of those dollars actually come into your company. So what the dealers really need to be, looking at is how much of that money that I actually am, seeding to my reinsurance company makes it into the reinsurance company. Most dealers don't know how to do this math. They don't know the questions to ask. And it's really just simple math. The administrators aren't necessarily trying to be unscrupulous or not trustworthy, but they also don't necessarily have an incentive to be extremely transparent and forthright when it comes to these fees.
So is there a fair bit of negotiation in that process?
There is. I mean, it really depends on your volume. So obviously larger dealers are going to have lower fees in the program, but we really don't focus on the fees too much. Like I always say, there's no fee that's too large. It's just a fee that isn't providing enough value. So that's always how we look at this equation. Dealers are obviously fee sensitive, especially in today's environment, which is understandable. But at the same time, I think dealers also appreciate if I'm paying a fee and I'm getting a lot of value for that, they're okay with that as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah, let's build on that value a little bit more. How do you guys provide value? What does that value look like to your client?
Yeah, so when you're sitting in these reinsurance meetings, the reinsurance program really has a couple legs of the stool. So you have the dealer, of course, that everybody's here to support. We have the reinsurance administrator. We have the dealer developer that's in the store. And then you have us as the investment manager. So we're the ones who are sitting there as the fiduciary to the dealer. We only work for the dealer. We don't work for anybody else. And we want to maximize the amount of money that's in this program. And the way that we do that is by making sure that, the monies are being invested correctly and make sure that the other folks in the program are actually doing their jobs. So it's about partnering with all these folks in the room. And we're really the only ones, based on how we go about our business, that want to see these monies grow. Everybody else in these programs really gets paid at the time of sale, right when that vehicle is sold, right when that contract is sold. They're happy because they're getting paid. For us, we're in this for the long game. So we need to see these assets build over long periods of time. That's also what opens the conversation for estate planning, generational wealth transfer planning, strategic planning at the dealership level, when folks are looking to grow, looking to acquire more stores, things of that nature.
So even for dealers that are in the program, then I think there's sometimes they just assume things are going well, but maybe aren't. How does a dealer monitor themselves and monitor their program really effectively? I mean, everybody can look at the number and go, what's going up or down, but is there things that maybe aren't working that they're not seeing?
Yeah, this is probably the biggest challenge in reinsurance, which is just reporting. So if you look at an administrator like Portfolio, and then you take their reporting and line it up against Zurich or line it up against TWS and AGWS, you're going to get completely different reporting. You're going to have the same basic numbers. You're going to see contract count. You're going to see unearned premium, earned premium, things of that sort. But the dealers are going to be getting different reporting. And this is what's called the session statement. So if you were to ask me what the best practices are, the dealer really needs to be diving into that session statement and then even going really a layer lower, which is the claims register. What that's going to tell you is every single customer that came back onto your service drive, what the car come in for, what repair was done, what was the cost, how many miles since you sold that vehicle, things of that sort, because that's going to help you understand whether you're putting the right types of risk into your reinsurance program, and then also what's happening on your service drive. We had a dealer that found out that one of their people on the service drive, every single truck that came in went out with a new ball joint. Well, those vehicles didn't need new ball joints. It was just that they knew they could get those claims paid under the service contract. Little did the service writer know that that was actually the dealer's own money.
Yeah. Oh, I can see that happen.
Yeah. So you want to avoid situations where vehicle comes in for a broken window motor, goes out with a new transmission because the individual on the service drive thinks they're quote unquote taking care of the customer. We always want to take care of the customer. That's first and foremost. It's what makes these programs so great. You're tying that customer back to your store. They're on your service drive, drinking your coffee, eating your donuts, talking to your salespeople. That's what we want. But we also don't necessarily want vehicles to, get parts replaced that don't need to be replaced.
Yep.
When you and I talked a few weeks ago, Jeff, in preparing for this episode, we talked about the high percentage of dealers who are doing reinsurance, which is a great thing. I think you said it was like 70 to 80%. So for the 20 to 30% that aren't doing it, what do you think is holding them back? Is it just like a knowledge gap, or is it something else?
I think it really has to do with some historical things that have happened within the space and its dealers' distrust of reinsurance. I'll bet if you talk to 100 dealers, about 90 of them will say they've had a bad experience with reinsurance. They know somebody who lost money. They know somebody who's been in a lawsuit. They're weary of what are called captive insurance companies or micro-captive insurance companies. So really the rhetoric around these, I'll be honest, is pretty negative. And there have been a lot of unscrupulous players in what was a very unregulated space over the last 20 or 30 years. Things have changed significantly. So there used to be things called dealer obligor programs, meaning if you run out of money, the dealer is on the hook to pay for these claims. You really don't see a lot of those anymore. Now they're admin obligor programs. So I think if you really just get back to it, it's dealers' mistrust and it's a lack of education, like we started off with. There needs to be more education. Dealers deserve to know what these programs are about and deserve to have a program that works well for them and for their customers.
Makes sense. Question about that's probably near and dear to our heart, and that is a buy sell. When a buy sell is going on, is reinsurance a benefit? Is it an issue you've got to kind of get around, or is it mean nothing? I mean, I kind of feel like it's the seller's program, so therefore maybe it doesn't affect the buy sell. But I'm curious what your take is on it.
Yeah, it really depends, who your buy sell advisor is and how good of a job they can do positioning this reinsurance asset. So you have stores, especially with certain manufacturers right now, that might be trading at very, low blue sky values to where they were. So folks may look at that and go, well, the store is not profitable. It didn't, have any earnings. What they fail to look at is that reinsurance company. And because these reinsurance companies are operated so differently, you meet one dealer and you look at one reinsurance company, you've looked at one reinsurance company because there's so many different ways these things can be run. So I think for buyers, it actually could represent a lot of upside only if they know what they could do with their folks in there, with their program, and scaling that on their side of the fence. Conversely, if you're a seller that knows you run a really good reinsurance program, well, then I think you should be asking for some of those reinsurance profits to be included in the valuation of the store, especially where you have stores that are trading at 5, 6, 10 times blue sky values or north of that. If you can have an incremental $1 million from your reinsurance program included in that valuation, well, now we're talking about big numbers to that seller.
So that does bring in an interesting point. I've had a lot of buyers over the years, and I wasn't really baiting you, but I really wanted to dive into this. I've had a lot of buyers over the years that tell me reinsurance should never be calculated into a recast financial statement or add backs to income, whatever you want to call it. And I don't agree with that necessarily, but you're saying it should be calculated in. Maybe the question is why, or if I'm a buyer, why should it be calculated in?
Yeah, and I'm okay being baited into that one, Paul. That's not a problem. I appreciate the transparency. I'm actually, that's when I'm at my best. But
Perfect.
I think the reason for for buyers to, or for sellers to make this argument that it should be included is that this is real profit to the dealer. Now, what you bring up, and the reason this typically isn't included, is because it's so easy to make this murky. It's very easy to say, well, you do things this way, we do things that way, or well, it could be X, but it could be Y. And what do the parties end up doing? They end up focusing on what's certain. And it's very easy to look at that manufacturer's profit and loss statement. At least everybody knows what the rules are when it comes to that game. When it comes to reinsurance, it is challenging to explain. It is a data-driven endeavor. And if you don't have a strong advisor who understands reinsurance, they'll probably just say, hey, you might be right, Mr. and Mrs. Dealer, but it's going to be too difficult for me to explain this to the buyer. And beyond that, usually the buyers, especially large buyers, they don't even really have much confidence in their reinsurance programs. You would think the larger the dealer is, the more they understand reinsurance. I'd argue it's actually the opposite.
Great points.
So, yeah, really good points. And to just kind of build on that too. So if there's a buyer who's looking at a potential acquisition and the selling dealer has a pretty robust and profitable reinsurance program, what would be your advice for how the buyer should approach that if they want to factor that into kind of the value and then also, transitioning that business to them as the owners of that store eventually?
Yeah, so what we don't typically see the economics of the reinsurance company actually be an asset that's transferred because it is a separate company. It isn't included in what would be called, the purchased assets in a transaction in any type of asset purchase agreement.
Right.
But I think it is important for that new dealer who's stepping in there to understand, what does that former program look like? Has this been a dealer that's been in the community for 50 plus years and they've been offering $19.99 oil changes to every customer that they've sold the car to? What happens if this new buyer has the same program except their oil changes cost $39.99? What's that going to do to your customer satisfaction? Even though you're running the same program, that oil change is now doubled in price. So there are some local, differences between dealers, how they've necessarily used their reinsurance programs. And I think it's important for buyers and sellers to be on the same page, because the last thing you want is for a customer to walk into that store that's quote unquote under new management. And the first thing they realize is that, wow, the cost of my oil change just went up double. I'm going to go down the street to that different Ford dealer and see how they're going to take care of me.
So shifting gears a little bit, after selling my stores, I became a 20 group moderator for 5 years of my life. And what I found was the really successful dealers were laser focused on their business. So you translate that into reinsurance. Those same dealers, I promise you, probably have that same laser focus on their reinsurance that they do in their stores. And they're always, if you're in an NADA group, you're at the top of the page. If you're in an NCM group, they're the ones on the left-hand side of the page. They're just the ones that are laser focused. What are those dealers doing? And I know you mentioned kind of doing a deeper dive, but is there anything else that those dealers are doing that, I don't want to call them the smartest, but you know what I mean? The ones that are really focused. What are they doing? And number one, and number two, maybe a part B to this would be, is there a place for the average dealer that's not really spending a lot of time on this where they can go get educated?
Yeah, so I think on the first point, it all comes down to the people. And I think as you say, smartest dealers realize, hey, if I'm not good at shooting free throws, I got two options. I can learn how to shoot free throws, or I can go out tomorrow and I can sign the best darn free throw shooter out there. So that's exactly what the dealers do. They say, hey, Jeff, I don't know a whole lot about reinsurance. Seems like you guys do. I want you in the room and I want you helping out. So they create leverage through their people. So whether that's external advisors or whether that's internal, the dealers have the right people around them. So the dealer principal probably has somebody on their team who's in charge of their F&I program. They're usually incentivizing that person by including them in the reinsurance. This is something that the best dealers almost always do, and the largest dealers do, is they'll include that general manager at 5% or 10%. That could be a significant amount of money to an individual in that position. So now you have somebody who has that owner's mindset when it comes to the reinsurance, and that really flows through the entire program.
Interesting. And then as far as training, education, where would you send somebody other than to
So
you?
I think you're getting a lot of this through 20 groups. You're seeing more of this. We're NCM's preferred partner when it comes to reinsurance, and their moderators done an outstanding job of really bringing this topic up because it's something that the dealers don't understand. Beyond that, I think the administrators do a really nice job of having sales forces that are national. So if you are a smaller dealer, what I recommend, work with somebody who's in your community. Work with that F&I agent who's going to be there in the store working with your folks. At the end of the day, this is all about the people. And really, if you think about this two ways, you'll build a great reinsurance program. Number one, first and foremost, it has to be great for the customer. Number two, it should be something that the people on your team and your stores understand. And if you work from those two places, it's going to benefit the dealer and be a really profitable program. So I think if you use that lens to really inform your thinking, you're going to have a strong program. So I'd start, 20 group with some of these insurance administrators. And then of course we love to be a resource, but I'm obviously biased. But this is where we spend a lot of our time consulting dealers who are starting programs up, who are looking to switch programs. They should just say, hey, Jeff, can you just take a look at this? And, probably not going to work with you, but I just want your opinion. We do that all the time, and we're happy to do it.
So you've been doing this for a while, Jeff. What role do you see this playing in succession planning, especially for family-owned stores transitioning to the next generation?
Yeah, so something that is coming up a lot is you're probably hearing a lot about the estate tax threshold and limit, which is slated to reduce at the end of this year under the the TCJA, which was the current tax package. Who knows politically where that's going to shake out? But what we do know is that we have this amount of exemption that you want to use. So if you're a single point Toyota dealer, very likely you're above that estate tax exemption. One, because you own a great franchise, and two, you probably have some really nice real estate under your feet. So the way you use this reinsurance for estate planning purposes is most of our dealers say, I don't need that money in my taxable estate, but I do want the next generation to start building wealth. I do want my son, my daughter, my son-in-law to actually feel bought into the store. I can't necessarily give them ownership in the store yet, or I may not want to give them ownership in the store. Maybe they're not qualified as a dealer principal, for example, with the OEMs, but you can include them in the reinsurance. So what that means is instead now of mom and dad having that pile of reinsurance assets grow in their name, they can put it in the name of the next generation. And they can do that while still maintaining control. So that's something that we see a lot of because these dealers do have a big estate tax planning problem, and very few of them have actually addressed that through sufficient planning.
Excellent. Excellent answer. Thank you. Regarding acquisitions, well, a lot of dealers are out in acquisition mode. Is there a way they can leverage their reinsurance to go acquire more stores?
Absolutely. So really there's three ways that I think you could use the reinsurance. These terms probably familiar to dealers because this is how they get into these programs. Advances, loans, distributions. So let's start with advances. This is when someone approaches you and says, you know what, if you write reinsurance business through us, we're going to advance you $5 million or $10 million. Dealer gets that money on their balance sheet. Now they can go use that to grow. You have then the loan setup where you have this reinsurance pool, and this is where it's really powerful. So you have assets coming into your reinsurance position. They're growing tax deferred, and now you can borrow that money out. And the beautiful thing about this is that it's really on your balance sheet. So when you're going and still working with outside lenders, it's not something that necessarily shows up on credit reports. Some do require disclosure, but you're going to be able to tap into those funds. And then the third way, which is just a distribution. So because most of these companies are C corporations, distributions come out at the qualified dividend rate. So for folks in coastal states, states with high income tax, that's about half of what you'd pay on your ordinary income tax rate. So our biggest and most successful dealers are feeding these reinsurance programs with tons of dollars, then using those dollars to go acquire more stores.
Yeah, it does.
Great advice.
Yeah, it brings up a good point. Why would you take a distribution when you could just go borrow the money? Why would a dealer do that?
They just don't know. They don't know that the loan is available to them, or they may not have surplus. Although you wouldn't be able to take the distribution if you don't have surplus. And really the challenge is, again, it comes down to misinformation. The agents who are selling these programs are trained really well and do a great job of improving what is referred to as PVR, per vehicle retail, and then your penetration rate, which is what percentage of customers are buying these products. That's really their focus. When you get into the things like the tax strategy, the legal side of this, that's not where they're very strong. So the dealer only gets to see, how do I increase my PVR? How do I increase my penetration? And they don't typically have anybody on their team who's actually giving them that tax and financial advice. That's the role that we typically come in and play. But you'd be surprised, in a lot of these reinsurance programs, there's no investment advisor that's sitting on top of these funds. It's just managed by a bank or a trust company. You call an 800 number and you hope that somebody picks up. And that's where I think there's an opportunity for the dealers right now.
That statement alone says a lot, doesn't it? Excuse me. Sorry. That statement says a lot.
Yeah. And I think the dealers deserve better. You know, the average dealer, I think, has, 70 vendors that they work with at one dealership. So think about it. If you've got 70 vendors and you've got 2 folks chasing you for each one of those slots, the average dealer has 200 to 250 people who's coming after them, trying to do business with them and earn their business. The dealer is exhausted. The dealer is confused, and they simply want someone who's going to provide good advice and good value. And I think you're starting to see more of that in the reinsurance space. And it's not something that the dealers are really getting from banks and trust companies who aren't doing anything more than just sitting on the assets, managing the money. They don't really care much about the actual program itself.
What have we missed? Is there any other tips or advice that you want to share?
I think don't overcomplicate it. You're hearing a lot recently in past years about dealer-owned warranty companies, DOWCs. They're really not suitable for the large majority of dealer groups. If you're a normal sized dealer group, or you're just a single point rooftop, get into what's called a CFC, controlled foreign corporation. You know, stick to the basics, work with a quality CPA, whether that's through auto CPA or dealer council, dealer CPA, and just surround yourself with good people and don't be afraid to ask questions. I think one of the most interesting things I see is that we see dealers take advice from other dealers. So I say, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Dealer, it's interesting. You're taking advice from someone who told you they never made money in reinsurance. Is that the best place to go for advice? Probably not.
Good point.
It seems too that there's a lot of reinsurance offerings out there, right? There's a lot of competition. How does a dealer choose? What would be the advice for the steps they should go through before they make a big decision?
Yeah, I think the number one thing and the way that we see this business really grow organically is by talking to their dealer peers and seeing how these programs have run. It really does start to look like a commodity when it comes down to the products. You know, it really doesn't matter whose vehicle service contract you're selling, whose paint and fabric protection product you're selling. Those are just products. Those are all the same. Where the differences come in are on the service and on the advisory side. So it's about working with somebody who's going to have the respect of your folks in the store, you know, on the F&I side, and somebody who says that this program is about building wealth. Most dealers just steal from themselves in their reinsurance. They don't hold enough money in reserves to pay for claims, and they take huge commissions or packs up front because they like the mailbox money. The problem with that is that they'll receive a huge 1099 and it's very tax inefficient. So again, I think it comes down to just knowing the right questions to ask and having trusted people you work with. Dealer principals, if you're in organizations, NAMAD, NADA, NCM, these affinity groups, working with folks like you guys, who the people are that do the business. That's still the best way to end up with good people.
So a dealer that's looking to sell, going through a buy sell, how do they decide the run out? I get this question asked a lot. Paul, how long before there's no more claims and everything's just gone into the reinsurance program and building? And I usually kind of find it's like 18 months is the term, but what's your experience on that?
So it totally depends on the mix of the contracts that they're selling. So if you're selling 5-year service contracts and I put my last contract in today and we close that sale tomorrow, well, that reinsurance company now has 5 years left of risk in it just based on that contract. Obviously, you have to look at volume. You have to look at the flow of those contracts to understand exactly when this will fully earn out, as it's called. But what dealers also don't know is they can go to their reinsurance administrator and ask for what's called a recapture offer. So what the reinsurance administrator will do is they'll calculate what they believe the value of your company is, and they'll actually cut you a check when you close and buy back that risk. Now, obviously, it's going to be at a slight discount because they're taking on the risk, but it's not a bad option for dealers because what dealers fail to recognize, and we had a dealer, unfortunately, didn't see this, you sell your store, who controls your service drive tomorrow?
Yeah, your buyer.
Not you. What does the new buyer want to do? They want to make those customers feel like they've been taken great care of. Their eyes will light up when they see one of your service contracts come across the service drive. Because what does it mean? It means that 20-point inspection, it's now a 220-point inspection. It means that window motor that had another 2 years of life, nope, it's only going to last for 2 more days. So what you find is that your loss ratio is going to spike after a sale, which makes complete sense. You would do the same thing. Somebody else's money, you're taking great care of the customers within the bounds of that reinsurance contract. And now that dealer that thought they were going to have money left, as it turned out, turns out to be a whole lot less money.
That's a great point. Thanks for sharing that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, the reinsurance companies sometimes will bring up that recapture offer. If they don't, this is something that every dealer should be asking. Every buy-sell advisor should be asking. They should be getting the session statements. They should be looking at the claims register. They should be going as far as even asking for what's called a reconciliation statement. And that's what lays down literally to the penny of where every single dollar is going.
Jeff, you are certainly an expert in this field. We're very happy that you were on and you shared some great advice. If our listeners or dealers, anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they reach out to you or your team? What would be the best way?
Yeah, the best way is by phone or email. Like I say, as long as our dealers are selling cars, we're working. I'm on the road probably 200 plus days a year, seeing dealers in every time zone across the country. The best way to contact me is just email Alpert, A-L-P as in Paul, E-R-T, @composition.com, or cell phone. I know some people don't give out their cell phone numbers these days. I actually get excited when my phone rings, which it does often, which is 818-288-1417. And, our team, there's now over 100 of us at the firm. Most have some, reinsurance knowledge and experience, probably the largest independent firm in the space. And we truly love helping dealers, and dealers deserve better, especially in these times. No secret that the business is getting tougher, not easier. But if there's a group of people that I think can weather any storm, it is the dealer community. They always find a way to persevere.
Excellent.
Jeff, real pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Driving Performance. The show notes include links to any resources mentioned in today's show. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave us a 5-star review. If you're considering buying or selling an automotive dealership, reach out to us at performancebrokerageservices.com or send an email to info@performancebrokerage services.com.